Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Carolina Weather Group. This is the Wednesday, March 27th, 2019 edition of our little weather get-together. It is show number 271, and tonight we are featuring National Weather Podcast Month. We have Dr. John Scala on from WeatherBrains and Marc Johnson on from the Stormfront Freaks. And as we've been talking about this month, it is National Weather Podcast Month. I think this is year number 3, if I'm not mistaken. So excited to have Dr. Scala on with us and Marc Johnson on with us, and we would love for you to participate with us tonight. If you are watching us on our YouTube page, our Facebook Live, or Periscope streams, you may submit questions or comments throughout the show. We'll be monitoring all of those outlets, and if you have any questions for our guests, we will be sure to address them. And if you're listening on our podcast version, we will let our guests kind of plug themselves and their respective weather podcasts. So we'd love for you to follow them and listen to the podcast. That's kind of the goal for National Weather Podcast Month. So very happy to have Dr. John Scala on and Marc Johnson on with us tonight. So before we get into tonight's interviews, I'm going to toss it over to James Brierton, who has the latest on the weather news in the area over the past week. James?
Scotty, thanks very much. That's right. We have some weather headlines for you here on March the 27th. Hard to believe that the month of March almost over. Starting close to home, we've got the Charleston radar, the WSR 88D there in Grays, South Carolina. Wanting to let you all know that this is going to be out of order until further notice. The National Weather Service telling us that they are waiting on parts in order to get this this full-blown radar, the WSR 88D, back up and running. In the meanwhile there, if you're along the low country, they will be using radars from other areas such as Wilmington or Columbia, but do keep that in mind if you're doing a lot of radar scanning. That is something that you may notice as you're tracking storms. Luckily, the weather fairly nice today. What I'm scrolling on your screen right now is a whole long documentation, and this is a proposed budget for the year 2020 from the Department of Commerce, which does include the National Weather Service. There are a bunch of line items here in this proposed budget. It is subject to change, but a couple of the things that have already jumped out at us. Speaking about radars, they're looking to reduce service life extension program for next generation radars. The planned program decreased to the service life extension program to sustain aging next generation weather radars, or NEXRAD infrastructure. The NEXRAD is a multi-year effort that began in 2015 and was originally anticipated to be completed in 2022. The program will extend the useful life of the NEXRAD array by approximately 15 years, but we've got a couple other reductions here as well too, including the airborne phased array radar termination. NOAA looking to terminate some research and development around the improving and detection of severe weather using airborne phased array radars. So again, this is all just proposed at this point, but something we'll keep a close eye on. Last but not least, as we look ahead to hurricane season, a new study out there is a headline from CNN.com. Stronger hurricanes could decimate forests and accelerate climate change, according to this new study. And what immediately comes to mind is a lot of the imageries that CNN references here with regards to Maria, but we can even roll some of the file footage that we have on hand in our control room, looking back at Hurricane Michael as it impacted portions of the southeast, where you can see just how it impacted there, not only those communities, but also the forests and the woodlands. And reading a little bit from this article to you tonight, the research suggests that this could be changes that come to the forest across much of the Atlantic tropics as climate change drives more powerful storms. And one potential effect of this could be that forests, rather than being net carbon stores, could actually become net carbon emitters, adding more carbon to the atmosphere. In other words, as the forests increasingly become victims of climate change, they could also then help contribute to it. So again, that is just one study that is out ahead of hurricane season, but Scotty, and bringing back in the rest of the panel, something that we'll keep an eye on.
Definitely so, and I know we didn't get it into our news segment, but the Air Force suffered so much damage at many of the military institutions throughout the country from this past year. They're asking for some money for repairs for the different sites as well. So hurricane season has been pretty bad for the area over the past couple of years, and we only wait to see what happens this year as the hurricane season kicks off in a little less than, I guess, 2 months from now. So we'll watch that. So let's start bring in our guests tonight. Dr. John Scala and Marc Johnson on with us as we wrap up National Weather Podcast Month. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Dr. John, we had you on a couple of years ago, so we welcome you back to our program. And Marc is it's a first-time guest for us. So our typical first-time guest question, we'll give it to Marc and John both, is tell us a little bit about your weather story. How did you get interested in this crazy weather world that we all live in?
That's a loaded question, Scotty. I guess I was talking today to a bunch of fifth graders. I'm involved with one of our local science museums, and I go out and do career days. And so I'm talking about my career and how I ended up where I am. And I told the kids that it wasn't a straight line. I'm not one of those weather geeks who knew right away that meteorology was their career path. They saw a tornado or they experienced a hurricane and said, that's where I'm going with my career. Mine wasn't like that at all. I started out in science. I've always been in science. That's where I knew I wanted to go. But I never, believe it or not, never thought of meteorology as a career. And it really wasn't until I was in graduate school that I actually took my first weather course. And after that, that's what I pursued for my doctorate. Ended up being able to participate in some fantastic experiments, missions. I have flown on 5 different research aircraft. I worked at NASA for a number of years. I've been able to travel around the world. It's been quite a ride, and I've enjoyed every minute of it.
Sounds good. I'm Marc. Hi. Thanks for having me on tonight. You know, I'm a complete amateur, not trained much of anything, but always been kind of a weather junkie or a weather enthusiast going back to when I was a kid. And when I went into college, I actually went into mathematics and secondary education, so I was a math teacher. But before I went into teaching, I started doing some radio. So I was a bad on-air radio person, but out in Huron, South Dakota, I had my first teaching job. And while I was there, they had a National Weather Service office actually in Huron. And when I arrived the first summer, they had a spotting class. And so I took it. I thought that would be kind of interesting. And there I was, in South Dakota, where they get a few tornadoes every now and again. So I took that spotting class and I kind of got hooked on paying attention to things and paying attention to the weather. And then I was on air for the mighty 1340 KIJV in Huron, South Dakota. And lo and behold, probably a month into my job, we had a tornado about 2 miles outside of Huron, and I was on air at the time. And so I was going through all the, we were emergency activated, going through we also had we had an FM station that was automated. So if any of you ever done anything in radio and you remember all these carts and things like that, we had an automated station that you just kept plugging carts into. So I'd have to cut a weather broadcast for the FM side and run over and slap that in the thing as all these storms were coming in. And my general manager showed up and asked if I had started the generator. And I said, no. I've been here for 3 weeks. I didn't know all those procedures. I was going through trying to figure it all out. So he said, I'm going to run down and start the generator, and then I'm going to hold the door open. And when I say run, you get yourself downstairs with me. So it was that close. And I just kind of went into a mode of just constantly reporting what I was getting off the wire. This was back in the 80s. So, we still had a wire. We had no, TV monitors or anything like that. But I went into that. And, after that, it was a bug. I wanted to pay really close attention, and I wanted to be involved in public safety. And so I continued sort of on in the public safety role in terms of a Skywarn spotter and things like that. So that's how I got it.
So, Marc, to kind of continue with the public safety aspect, weather podcasts have become more popular throughout the past couple of years, and I know your colleague Phil was able to start the National Weather Podcast Month. And Dr. John Scala, I'll bring you in first because you guys kind of laid the foundation, the foundation for weather podcasts with WeatherBrains. So, if you guys don't mind, tell our listeners who are listening tonight who may not be familiar with your programs, maybe a little bit about your podcast, what you guys focus on, maybe some of your panelists, and just kind of talk a little bit about the weather podcast you guys represent.
Yeah, sure, Scotty. I'm actually relatively new to WeatherBrains. we did show number 688 on Monday evening, which is more than 10 years, I think, of that program being on. So I came in only a few years ago, so I feel like the new kid on the block. But we have quite an assortment. We represent the broadcast side of things. I think I'm probably the academic type that's in there. We've got nationally well-known meteorologists like James Spann, Kevin Selly, Nate Johnson. Aubrey Abranowitz is not far from me. She's down in Virginia, so we actually share often what our current weather situation is like, what kind of precipitation we've experienced. The show, I heard you guys talking before we began this episode. What are we going to talk about from show to show? Well, it seems like we never have enough time to talk about the things we want to talk about. There's always some incident occurring. There'll be a weather event. There'll be an episode of maybe somebody saying the wrong thing on air, which then gets blown out of proportion, and we talk about that. But it's typically, there is just an incredible assortment of things to discuss, and we've got a group of incredibly intelligent, highly opinionated individuals who really like to speak their mind. So I try to find my way in there at times. Often I just let them go.
And Mark, with you guys with Stormfront Freaks, I know you guys are a little bit newer to the podcast realm, but you guys have come onto the scene in a really big way.
We've tried, right? So Phil Johnson happens to be my brother. He's sort of the mastermind behind it, and his idea was to create something that, as he puts it, wasn't quite as sciencey as some others, and that's fine. He just had this idea that he could draw in sort of those armchair weather enthusiasts or armchair meteorologists, so to speak. I don't want to use that, loosely, but he wanted to kind of pull in some of those folks like him and myself who don't have a meteorology background, who don't have a science background, and try to explain things to people in ways that they could really understand. And so that was his idea. And so what we've gone into it, and maybe we lack a little bit of that background, because while we have some great people, we have Kim Cunningham, who was a former on-camera meteorologist with the Weather Channel, and we have Dina Knightley, who is with the digital side of the Weather Channel now, and Mark Massaro, who was a television meteorologist in Cincinnati for a number of years. So we've got the people with the science background and with the good background, but we also have a few of us that don't have sort of that background at all, and we probably cover that up with humor and entertainment. We try to throw that little aspect into it, and whether that's on purpose or accidental, sometimes it's sometimes it's a combination of both. And sometimes when we're trying to be funny, we're not, and when we're not, we are. You know how that goes. But we do try to throw some entertaining aspects into the podcast as well. But remarkably, we've been able to get a lot of really good guests. They've been really good sports with us in terms of understanding what we're trying to do, which again is sort of educate people on a level that hopefully everybody can understand. So that's what we go after. And yeah, we haven't been around that long. Our catalog only has 75 episodes, and of course we only produce a show every other week, so that keeps our numbers down a little bit. But we're happy to be around, and we're happy for folks to find us and join us. And we're happy to be celebrating National Weather Podcast Month with all of you.
Mark, being a relatively new podcast, how'd you go about getting panelists or group members or your main people to join?
Hard work, and just we had. I'll tell you what. So we started with just Phil and I and Mark Massaro, and a couple of folks that aren't with us anymore now that were storm chasers that Phil had run across in some of his work. And, then it became just sort of those folks put their information out on social media and kind of try to drum up interest. Mark Massaro had a connection, got a couple of guests on for us. And then Phil had this thing where every time he had a guest on, he would ask the guest to recommend 2 or 3 additional guests. And so we would use that then to kind of expand out, and we'd say, hey, so-and-so recommended you. Would you mind coming on our show? And Phil's a pretty smooth talker. And so he was able to kind of accomplish that. And both Dina Knightley and Kim Cunningham were actually guests of ours before they joined us as hosts. So we kind of wrangled them in by first having them on as guests and then getting them to become hosts for us as well. So
I thought you were going to say lots of free beer too. That helps.
Well, we do we do have a virtual green room, and we do make sure that we invite everybody to imbibe with us while we're broadcasting.
Dr. Scala, that is similar to how you joined WeatherBrains, right? Because you were a guest at one time.
Oh, that's right, Ricky. I was actually going to say that. They got me on the program, and I honestly didn't know what I was getting myself into. And after the first 15 or 20 minutes, I thought, this is not really what I expected. But it grew on me. And I think the background that I bring to the show, I've worked in academia, I've worked in national television, I've worked in the private sector, and now I work independently, I have my own business. I think that brought a lot to the program, and I think they like that.
It's interesting to me how many different weather podcasts there are nowadays, and kind of the variety. WeatherBrains is, I would argue primarily an audio podcast still. We seem to be more of a video podcast. And then Stormfront Freaks is kind of a combination of both, right, Mark?
Yeah, correct. I mean, we still, our primary is audio, but we do the video for those who are interested in watching while we do it. We call it raw because they get to see behind the scenes. So.
It seems like in the world, of putting all the content out we can and 24/7 being attached to our phones and everything, there's always something out there for us to listen to nowadays. So, well, let's switch topics a little bit here, and we'll jump into a few topics that you guys are experienced in. James, I believe we've got a video that's going to set up kind of outdoor safety and thunderstorms and lightning, and talk about how important it is to take weather seriously.
What are the criteria for canceling or postponing or delaying a game when there's a thunderstorm in the area?
So for canceling or postponing a game lightning-wise, MLB does not have a rule like the NCAA. So we're kind of worried about anything within the 4 to 5 mile radius. And that's when we'll start to post things on the stadium scoreboard. Want to head to shelter, move away. But there is not an MLB standard. We've played on with a lot of lightning going on in the distance.
What strikes me is the number of people that don't realize that you cannot have thunder without lightning and vice versa. There's still this perpetual perception error that exists among the public that, well, I'm safe as long as I don't see lightning. If I see lightning, then I'm in danger. I was asking the kids today, well, if you hear thunder, are you still at risk? And probably 1/2 to 2/3 of the kids said, oh, I'm still safe. That's what the public thinks as well. That's what adults think. And that's also, I think, what people who are in charge of making decisions on the playing field think. We have to somehow educate them to the point where they realize if you hear thunder, you're at risk for electrocution. Every thunderstorm is a potential killer. We lose close to 40 people a year in the United States unnecessarily due to lightning strikes. And I think this is an avenue that we really have to hit strong, particularly outdoor venues, sporting events, outdoor festivals. This is an avenue that we really need to work towards improving our safety and also our education.
It's interesting to me that there's not more of a almost political side that gets involved in this. I mean, imagine if we didn't regulate smoke detectors and things like that at buildings and we just let people do whatever they wanted. I'm surprised there hasn't been more of a push from state legislators or something like that to say, hey, there needs to be a policy in place for games and things like this.
I think once you issue a policy, then you're starting to infringe on someone's right to be an idiot, frankly. Let me tell you an experience that I had a couple years ago when my son was playing soccer at the high school level. I knew there were thunderstorms around that afternoon when he was playing. So when he finally got home, I said, did you guys play the entire game? And he said, yes, we did. And my question was, did you see lightning or did you hear thunder? Yeah, we did. And did you still play? Yes, we did. And I said, well, why? Well, because the referee didn't call the game. They wanted to finish the game. So I immediately wrote a note to both the head coach and the assistant coach. And I said, you just put 10, 20, 30 people at risk for electrocution. Was that necessary? Well, that wasn't our call. That was the referee's call. We need to step up and take ownership for this problem.
Yeah, I want to get in on this too, because it seems like it's really interesting because across the spectrum of professional and really collegiate sports has got, their policies, but the PGA has really stepped up to, keep everyone on the golf courses safe. And it'd be nice to see, Major League Baseball, NFL, and some others take notes from them and copy what they're doing.
Several years ago, when I was working at the Weather Channel, I was able to go out to a PGA tournament the week before the Masters. And what struck me during that event was the vans available at every hole for the players to seek safety, but there was no plan for all of the people watching that event.
Ricky, you and I, we do some work with Speedway Motorsports Incorporated, and we have yearly meetings with our racetracks that we work at, and we set criterias depending on the event. If it's a big NASCAR event, we have 3 barriers per se. We have something that we're watching, and then once it gets in within, let's say, 10 miles of the area of the track, we have notified all the officials that need to be notified, and we are enacting evacuation. So when we see lightning strike within 8 miles of our facility, that's it. We're done. Ricky, last year comes to mind, the Coca-Cola 600. We're right beside NASCAR's booth, and we're watching radar, and they're communicating with us. And once the 8 mile, the lightning hit within 8 miles, we gave them an X. And about that time, the caution flag came out. The cars came down pit road, and the red flag was issued. And it was maybe 10, 15 minutes before we actually saw the rain move in. But by then, we were able to get 95% of the folks out of the speedway into a safer place. And very thankful that NASCAR and Speedway Motorsports takes weather seriously. And it just, again, we talk about this a lot. Unfortunately, with Major League Baseball, I'm afraid something major is going to have to happen before we start to see some change implemented there.
It's interesting that with MLB, the decision still comes down to the umpire, as far as I understand. That's the deciding factor, is the one guy out there who gets to make the decision. It's no one else who maybe has more data, is more informed or anything. MLB's enacted the replay in New York City. Why can't they set up a weather monitoring system or hire a company like, many that are out there to monitor all their games that are ongoing?
It makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, absolutely, to me too. I mean, so Phil from Stormfront Freaks works for athletics at Miami University in Ohio, and I know he's talked about this, about what they've been trying to do there, for their outdoor sports and trying to protect it. But it's amazing to me at all levels how when you mentioned interfering with people's rights to be stupid. I used to officiate or umpire youth baseball and softball games, and on more than one occasion, I called a game and canceled it and said, "Everybody go home," and the abuse I got sometimes from the parents for doing that is, let them play one more inning. I could see cloud to ground lightning. And I said, we can't be out here. But it's amazing how many people said, we can, we'll get one more inning in, no problem. And I went, no, this, talk to me after we get like you say, get a lightning strike and somebody dies or somebody gets injured from it. It's amazing.
I emceed the 4th of July fireworks here in Bristol a couple years ago, and we were expecting a line of thunderstorms to move in. I gave them 30 minutes heads up. Hey, this is going to be here at this time. And even being a local meteorologist, everyone kind of looked at me like, oh, okay, whatever. Band kept playing, and, we gave them 15 minutes and gave them a 10-minute heads up. I was like, if you don't want to get wet, you better move now. And the thing that caused everyone to run for their lives was a gigantic lightning strike and a thunder clap right over our heads. And it's just one of those things where it's like, no one will do anything until it starts raining. So
I think it goes back also to the whole notion of it won't happen to me. A lot of the hot topic stuff with weather warnings across the entire spectrum, whether it's severe thunderstorm, tornado warnings, just people not taking warnings seriously. And that goes right in with lightning also.
Yeah, on that topic, there was an interesting comment that a colleague of mine made the other day, and it's, have we maxed out our ability to, for lack of a better word, save people in severe weather? because you always have people who are going to, the building's on fire, they're going to stop and take a video of it. And there's always going to be people who you can give them 30 minutes heads up notice that a tornado's coming their way, but until they see it, they're not going to do anything. And so it's like, have we maxed out our abilities as a weather enterprise to provide them with the best information available for them to make their decisions? Does it really come down to personal responsibility?
It's funny you mentioned that, Ricky, because Facets, which is, looks to be maybe a new warning system that comes out in the next couple of years, there's been talks that we could see tornado warnings issued up to 60 minutes in advance. And is there a time that we have too much time to prepare? Maybe people are like, I've still got 20, 30 minutes before this comes. I mean, do you guys have any thoughts on that?
Not even that, but it will become a spectator thing. If we get so good at pinpointing where a tornado is going to touch down, will people actually drive there at a safe distance to see it and then see the damage afterwards? Dr. Scala, you got any thoughts on this topic?
Oh, I think that's that's a very good point. One of the complaints, maybe not complaints, one of the criticisms, I guess, of warn on forecast, which is under study right now as being a very real opportunity that will come down the road in the next 12 months. One of the issues that may come from that is too much time, too much warn time, and you may very well end up with this spectator mentality. Let me comment a little bit back on what Chris was saying. A lot of what we do, and social scientists are telling us this, a lot of our reaction, a lot of our response has to do with our own personal risk assessment and also our experience with threatening weather. If you've never experienced a dangerous situation, then your risk tolerance is going to be far greater than someone who made it through Hurricane Camille or Hurricane Katrina. And I think trying to get a public to rally around a common theme when their experience level is so different, and some of that's tied to age and of course where they live, I think that's a huge problem, a huge challenge.
I totally agree with you there. So many social, different social and demographics across every little region and town. Every situation is going to be a little bit different, and trying to reach that individual audience is going to be, there's not a blanket answer for, I guess, that goes across the entire national spectrum that will work. Every little situation is going to have to be tailored, to fit that special demographic of people. But just like you said, different people have different tolerances for things, and it's really hard because you want to tell people the real risk involved of not leaving, for example, a mobile home in a tornado. I mean, you want to be as descriptive as possible, but stop short of really maybe even horrifying people. You tell them about some of the injuries that people sustain in tornadoes, which from, I guess, a politically correct standpoint probably wouldn't be the best thing to do, but sometimes people need to know the truth.
I'll jump in here and say that over the last week, there's been a lot of chatter on weather Twitter about the cars parked underneath the bridges, especially out west or with the storms. And just today I was reading an account that was very, unfortunately, graphic about, in the past, just the kind of injuries people have sustained underneath those overpasses. And sometimes it does take something like that to, really get that stuck in your mind, because it's horrifying what severe weather can do. And like y'all have been saying, there's just, the public doesn't realize that.
You've probably seen the video from the Andover tornado of 1991, I think it is, where there was a film crew that took shelter under an overpass, and they actually got a couple of families to go with them, and they actually survived. It was either an F2 or an F3, I don't remember which. But that happened just a couple of years before, let's say it would have been 8 years before the May 3rd, 99 outbreak that produced that F5 that moved through Moore, Oklahoma. And I remember vividly looking at the silhouette of a couple of people who died because they were up against the concrete of an overpass, and they were just blasted by the debris that went through there. So an error, which unfortunately led to the survival of one event, led to the fatality of another during another event.
You go back and talk about, people's perception of weather. I don't know if you run into this up in Pennsylvania, but, in Appalachia here, we have an issue with mountains and tornadoes and people not believing that we can get tornadoes in our area as well. It really comes back to, not just what you were told, but what your parents thought and what your grandparents thought and generations back sometimes.
we have a problem up here that, and this James was talking about this, might have been on Monday or the week before, but if that event is not right in your home, don't interrupt my television program. And I remember covering, it was a tornado warning for the local NBC affiliate here in central Pennsylvania, and I broke into programming, which we're providing a public service. That's what we do, right? Save lives. So I broke into local programming, and I covered this tornado threat for about 45 minutes for the length of the warning. The emails that I got, because this was on a Sunday afternoon during a PGA tournament in which Tiger Woods was leading, this was several years ago, the emails I got about interrupting their programming was, I can't even repeat them here.
No, we do a segment on our show sometimes called Weather Fools, right? And I mean, there's no end to the material for that. You can well imagine. We had just probably a month ago, we featured the Weather Fools, and the Weather Fools were the people who were trolling you or others. It was not you in this case, Dr. Scala, but people like you for that exact reason. And it had to do with the Dixie Alley tornado outbreak here not too long ago. Yeah. And there were people that said, get off the air, quit doing this, bring back my whatever it was that they were watching. And this just repeated over and over again. There were all these comments about that. And I think, it's to go back and circle around with when you talk about social media and things that people can do with that. I think now we have so much available to us. We can consume whatever news, whatever information we want. So if I want to believe the video from where the news crew went under the overpass and people's lives were saved, if that's what I want to believe, then that's what I'm going to believe. And I can find other things that will support that. And so then I just continue to believe that. And I think that perpetuates some of this problem with the public not wanting to believe that it can happen to me. Get it back to that, that idea of not in my own backyard, or it's not going to happen to me because, look, it didn't happen to them.
It's like a confirmation bias almost.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is.
I do think one thing we need to do better as a broadcast industry is inform people and educate people that, hey, we cannot just break into one county or one zone. Yeah, coming eventually. But many people do have that mindset of, hey, why are you covering this? It's in, for lack of a better area, Birmingham, and I'm in Tuscaloosa. Who cares? But many people don't seem to realize that it's all or nothing when it comes to TV signals nowadays. Which is, think about Netflix and Hulu and things like that. You're used to getting your choice. You get to watch what you want to watch. And when you don't have that option because you only get one signal, I can see how it tweaks a few people, but maybe it comes down to an education thing once again, among many other topics that need to be better educated on.
Hey, Ricky, I want to jump in here also with that. With these streaming services like Netflix, Hulu, and you just go down the list, Apple TV, etc. I'm surprised there's not any kind of government legislation already in place for these services to stream warnings, in these geolocated areas. And just want to get y'all's thoughts on that.
I think that's going to have to be coming eventually. But right now, it's kind of a thing of how do you do it? How do you regulate it? The software is probably easy to implement, I imagine. They already know where you live. They know your IP address and all the stuff you're getting from them. But it's going to be one of those things where does Netflix and Hulu want to take that responsibility? And do they want to provide, for many people, how they would view it, an interruption to their services? Because many people watch Netflix and Hulu because they don't have commercials, don't have these interruptions. And do these companies actually want to become places that have that kind of stuff? Well, let's switch topics here a little bit from that to maybe another topic that causes a little bit of arguments, hurricanes. We are coming up on hurricane season here, so let's talk about the categorization of hurricanes. Carolina is certainly a place that sees many hurricanes over the years. A viewer comment a minute ago saying, people who complain about weather perhaps should experience first. Saying that she's been in a few hurricanes, floods in Charleston's, horrible winds in the North Carolina mountains, the evacuations and everything that come from that can be horrific to experience. But my question to you guys and the entire panel is the way we classify hurricanes now, the category 1 through 5 scale. Is that the best way? And if not, what are your thoughts on how we could change that? Mark, we'll start with you if you want.
Sure. So thanks. We talked about this on one of our shows, again, not too long ago. And I thought one of the interesting things that came up is I guess I will say I think just the 1 through 5 is probably not sufficient. Too many people now will say, oh well, it's a category 1, I'm fine, or it's category 2, I'm fine. But then the flooding comes, right, and the storm surge and the flooding comes after it, and then that causes all the problems that it does, and turn around, don't drown, which nobody believes either. They try to drive through it, right? Well, anyway, we talked a lot on our show about, could there possibly be a 2-column, 2 or 3, column 1 through 5, where it says, okay, it's a category 1 in terms of wind, but the expected storm surge would put it at a category 3 for storm surge. And what does that mean? Now, I know that can get confusing because people have more things they have to think about there, but maybe at least one or two extra pieces of information might be valuable to people and might help them understand, oh yeah, that last one that was a category 3 for storm surge really caused a lot of problems. I have to take that seriously. That was one of the things we talked about and thought maybe there was a way to do that.
Dr. Scala, from an academic standpoint, would this cause confusion in how records are kept and things like that? We obviously went from the F scale to the EF scale with tornadoes, but reanalyzing, would that come into play as far as going back and looking at different hurricanes and perhaps reclassifying it if we ever were to change the scale?
I think most definitely that's going to foul up the climatology. That was one of the comments I think that was made when the EF scale was under consideration. Fortunately, the record of reliable tornadic events goes back to about 1950. So when the implementation of the Doppler radar network in 91, and then the EF scale in 2000, was it 7, I think? Anyway, I think that there is a side-by-side comparison at times that's made with particular events. But we needed to go to the EF scale. For anyone who's done damage surveys and had to rely on the old F scale, it was totally inadequate. The EF scale now is actually under consideration for an improvement to that as well. And engineers have been brought in. There's a group that's actually looking at improving the EF scale. To go back to the hurricane scale, the beauty of it is it is simple, right? It's 1 to 5. I'm really glad that the Hurricane Center got away from incorporating storm surge, minimum pressure, and maximum winds under the same category. We found from Hurricane Ike, for example, that was bad. That was a bad thing to do. We found from Hurricane Katrina, which was a category 3 at landfall, but had a category 5 storm surge, if you wanted to go back to the original numbers. I'm really glad that that's been separated out. The public, are they ready for that? I'm not sure, particularly in the heat of an event.
Yeah, I want to get in on this also, and you make a great point. And also to go forward with that, I think if you want to keep the Safford-Simpson scale as is, keep it. But what's more important to me is being able to communicate the appropriate risks, because in hurricanes, the majority of deaths come from storm surge, not from wind damage or wind-related damage. So what's going to be the best way to communicate the risk of that storm surge? I guess in addition to the wind speed. And that's a great question for somebody that's much smarter than I.
Right.
So another one of our topics that we wanted to talk about tonight was the future of meteorology. And so this kind of goes down perhaps the same path. And, as we continue to improve our technology, we continue to improve our ways of gathering different data, from drones to more high-tech sensors. The question is, how advanced are we going to be able to get, and where do you see the weather enterprise being in, let's set it a yearly thing, 20 years, for example? So, Dr. Scala, we'll start with you. If you had a magical crystal ball spot 20 years from now, where do you see the biggest gain in meteorology being?
Wow. Well, the technologies that keep coming along are spectacular. We're going to move away from Doppler radar. We'll probably get to phased array. I think that'll be one of the improvements. I anticipate drones will be a big part of our remote sensing of the atmosphere. We'll start sending drones more into hurricanes. We're doing some of that now, but I think more of that will take place. We'll probably minimize the risk to humans with the technologies that will be in place. We'll have to be very careful of being overloaded with data. I think we're there now. So 10 or 20 years from now, oh my goodness, how are we going to deal with that data load?
That was a thing with GOES 16. I think they said one time GOES 16 was going to send back so much data that we were going to have a hard time processing it for a little bit of time.
Right. That's right. there will always be the human factor. So I think in terms of broadcast, I think a lot of folks, when they're at risk, immediate risk, they want to see a human talking to them. So I don't think we'll completely go away from a human on television, a broadcaster telling you what the current situation is. But I think television broadcasting, the meteorology is going to change. I think there'll be less of that on television and more of it here, which just about everybody gets their information from. Very few people go and get their news from television. So television itself is going to change. There's no question about that. But when it comes down to one of those life-threatening events, I think most people still want to see human.
It'll be interesting, as you say, television will change, and I agree with you. I believe it will. Television, though, seems to be one of the easiest ways, and the thing people still turn to during big events as of right now. So it'll be interesting to see if we do move to a more digital space, whether these digital spaces and whatever form TV still exists at the time, bring in meteorologists or bring in broadcast Mets to be on their network when a major event happens.
Yeah, I agree with that. Good idea.
Mark, any thoughts on this?
I'm not a meteorologist, right? And so I don't have that background, but bringing it back around to what we talked about with, can they narrow it down to a more finite location in terms of warnings and things like that? And I think, given the technology improvements that we've had within 20 years, we probably ought to be able to do that in a, even in a broadcast world, but maybe broadcast moves more, like you said, to the phones and the other devices that people have. And so the live person may come in on a smaller geographic warning. That would be kind of nice to see.
We're talking about technology and how technology will improve everything, but I want to jump back a couple of years here real quick, because Mark, you have a pretty big background in ham radio. And I want you to kind of explain to our viewers how ham radio works in weather and how they can get involved in it. And Dr. Scala, I know James Spann has spoken many times on the podcast WeatherBrains about, he used to do ham radio stuff. That's how he got involved in weather. But Mark, talk about how ham radio in the weather enterprise could still be a valuable thing even now in 2019.
Sure. And I haven't been involved in it that long, but long enough to have, discovered some of the reasons why we still use it. And up in our area, I'm in Minnesota, we don't have a lot of tornado outbreaks, but we have our share. And so our spotter network in our area utilizes ham radio still as our primary means of communication, while we also use, these devices and the texting and the other ways that you can get in contact with the National Weather Service and with each other. Ham radio is still the primary use. And there's a number of reasons for that. Number one, it's very reliable. And generally, it works all the time for the most part. Most of the repeaters and the things, a repeater is a location or a radio that everybody can reach, right? Everybody reaches the repeater, and then that sends a signal out to everybody else. So it's that group communications over amateur radio. And those units are up all the time. They have generators, they have all those kinds of things. And when you're in your car, mobile, and you're spotting, you can more easily use a radio than you can trying to text. Obviously, we don't want people doing that, right? And we don't want people trying to bring up things on their, especially just a storm spotter who's by themselves, doesn't have anybody else with them navigating or helping them like a spotter or like a chaser might have. So it gives you that advantage of being able to pick up the radio and make an immediate contact without having to dial anything, without having to really think about it. You just bring that microphone up, and you can do hands-free too with amateur radio as well, which a number of people do. So I think from that standpoint, it's safe, it's easy to use, and you can talk to everybody right away. And in our area, the National Weather Service still monitors the regional repeaters where the storm spotting groups are using. So it's one central point of communication. And I think that's, one of the advantages to it. And the crowd using it's getting older. We're having a hard time getting younger people involved in it, but I think it's still a viable communications method that works really well for reporting storm conditions. Again, everybody hears it. Everybody knows what's going on. At least everybody that's, on the network at the time.
You mentioned how the National Weather Service uses ham radio. We have a story that our panelist James Brierton put together a few years ago that talks about how the Weather Service does that.
A tornado coming down out of the clouds and almost to the ground level.
When the weather is at its worst,
South of Yule Road, it's probably getting close to 35 right now.
everyday citizens using radio communications act as foot soldiers for the National Weather Service.
Play a vital role in helping us to monitor what's really happening on the ground. Because as I said, we only see what's up in the storm clouds, so we really need that verification to know what's happening on the ground, to let other people know, maybe they're downstream of the storm, what they can anticipate.
Forecasters still prefer real people over today's technology.
This is the Georgia Amateur Radio Emergency Service Net.
Robert Burton receives incoming radio messages for the Weather Service.
The radar can only see so much. I mean, it cannot see the actual tornado on the ground, and that's where the eyes and ears of Skywarn comes into play.
Skywarn spotters are the name of volunteers watching and reporting the weather. From where Robert sits in Peachtree City, he can talk with radio operators across the state. One of them is Huey Kenmar.
The guy sitting on top of a hill saw a tornado and was giving us the exact place it was and where it was headed.
And when all else fails, radio operators say they are among the most dependable.
There are many times we'll have storm spotters in the field that will not have cell phone coverage in a particular area. However, they will have ham radio coverage.
A tornado.
Certainly a valuable resource that still is used today and probably will be used for many years to come. Well, we're getting close to 9:15 here and the end of our show. But since this is National Weather Podcast Month and we've got a few folks on from different weather podcasts, we want to ask them what is their favorite memory from their respective podcasts. So, Mark, we'll let you go first. Do you have any memories that stick out from a episode of Stormfront Freaks?
You know, there's been several where we've laughed so hard we, could hardly talk anymore, and that's been because of gaffes that have happened, and because of sometimes it's somebody trying to share their screen, and those kinds of things. And so I tell people, if you want to see that kind of stuff, you do have to watch our live broadcast, because that's the raw. We cut those things out for the audio podcast, so it's not quite as because you lose something when you can't see it happening. But we had Gary England on, legendary broadcaster and meteorologist in Oklahoma City. And he had to be probably one of the most entertaining. I mean, he was as knowledgeable as they come and full of knowledge and lots of great topics, but he's also entertaining as all get out with his phrases and his things that he says. And you have to hear him to know what I'm talking about. But he was a very, very entertaining guest. And I enjoyed that show, and I know our listeners and viewers did as well, because it was one of our most listened to and shared out episodes.
We certainly know all about that. We've had Gary on, I want to say once or twice now, and he is certainly a hoot. To going back to people trying to share screens, yeah, we've had that too. When we had Kevin Stelly on one time, and he tweeted out the admin link instead of the watch YouTube link.
Oh, no.
Certainly some random people from Texas were joining us on our podcast, which was interesting. So it's always a memorable.
Ricky, if I'm not mistaken, they were wearing masks. I was like,
they were. It was like a
wrestling
terrorist group to join our podcast. So interesting there. Dr. Scala, how about you?
Oh, we've had several. One of my favorite is whenever we can get Chuck Doswell on. I just really appreciate his straight on view of things. It may not always be what you want to hear, but it is his honesty that comes through. Whenever we can get him, we were supposed to have him on Monday. For some reason, it didn't work out. So we'll get him on soon. I think one of the episodes that stands out in my mind really vividly is a bit of a somber one, and I'll just relate it to you shortly. It followed the Joplin F5 from a few years ago, and it was the guest was actually a medical doctor who was out storm chasing that day, and ended up storm chasing obviously right into Joplin. And when the hospital went down, he was actually brought in, identified himself as a surgeon, and ended up working a 12-hour shift. And just to hear him talk about what he experienced from just going out storm chasing that day, ending up 12 hours in the emergency room was really phenomenal.
That's quite the story. I got to go back and watch that one. I'm not sure I've seen that episode, so that's one I need to go look up.
Yeah.
Well, Scotty, I will hand it off to you to allow our guests to plug their social media accounts and wrap up the show here.
Definitely so. Thank you, Ricky. One more thing before we let you guys go, and give us your information about your podcast is, what's the future look like for Stormfront Freaks and WeatherBrains? You guys have any upcoming guests that you're excited to have, or maybe some new events or something like that going on?
I'll jump in, Mark from Stormfront Freaks. I was going to mention this earlier because you had Mace Michaels, from the Twins, talking about the Lightning and some of those things. We're definitely going to ask him some of those questions because we have him on next week on Thursday, April 4th at 9:00 Eastern time. He will be our guest live, and then of course he'll obviously on the audio version of the podcast as well. So that's coming up. For sure. So we're going to ask him some questions based on what we've talked about here tonight. That'll be good. And, we always throw in new little bits. Watch and listen for our Weather Trollbot 5000. That's been one of our viewers and listeners' favorite for some reason. It's kind of odd, but you'll have to listen for what that's all about.
Dr. Scala, what about WeatherBrains?
Yeah, I'm just looking at our schedule. We're going to, on April 1st, will be a show on hazard simplification. So we're going to have, I think Eli Jax is going to be on that show. We're going to be talking about the Columbus, Mississippi tornado on April the 8th. On April the 22nd, this should be really interesting. Harold Brooks is going to be on there with Victor Ginsini. They're going to talk about some of the work they're looking at with changes perhaps in Tornado Alley. That should be really interesting. And I'm just looking ahead here. We're going to have Gary Woodall on April the 29th. So we'll really start talking about safety with outdoor events there. So we got quite a lineup coming down the road.
Very cool. And to kind of with that, we have Victor Ginsini coming on talking about the same thing in towards the end of June. And next week we have a guest coming on, Doug Hildebrand, directs the Weather Ready Nation program. He's going to be talking about hazard simplification and some of the upcoming spring and summer hazards. So good stuff. It's cool how we're coordinating some of the same messages. So hopefully that'll be getting out to all those who are listening the weather for the weather podcast. And if you are listening tonight from WeatherBrains or Stormfront Freaks, so we are on the air every Wednesday night and at 8:15 p.m. Eastern time. And so I'm going to let Dr. Scala and Mark, if you guys don't mind, to plug your program, maybe where our listeners and followers can find you all and the information, and maybe a social media site or website or wherever you would like for them to be directed towards.
Well, sure, Scotty. WeatherBrains is on every Monday night. Every Monday night. I've been trying to get those guys to move the time back a little bit. I don't start here in the East until 9:30, which means I don't finish until after 11 p.m. And if you're an early riser, that makes for a short turnaround. But every Monday night, 9:30 Eastern, 8:30 Central Time, for a bunch of weather geeks just like you guys. We talk about anything and everything, and we have quite an interesting set of lineups over the next several weeks. So you can email us at email@weatherbrains.com, or just do a search for WeatherBrains. You'll find us online.
Great. I'm Mark from Stormfront Freaks, and again, thanks for having us tonight. It's been a lot of fun. Stormfront Freaks records every other Thursday because we just can't figure out how to get together on a weekly basis. So you have to go to our website, stormfrontfreaks.com, and you'll make sure you find out which Thursday night we're on in case you want to check us out live. But then, of course, our podcast is released on all the regular podcast sources, typically on the weekend afterwards. We also are on Oklahoma Weather Tracker TV on Thursday nights. I believe it's 7 o'clock Central, if I'm not mistaken. So they do broadcast our broadcast edit of our show as well. You can find us on Twitter at Stormfront Freak, no plural on that one. And we're on Facebook, Stormfront Freaks as well. So you can find us on all those places. And again, thanks for having me tonight.
Yeah, no problem, man. Go on your favorite podcasts, iTunes. So when it's quiet in the office, I'll pop on WeatherBrains or Stormfront Freaks and listen to you all as I'm doing work in the office or working out or wherever it may be. So podcast is a great thing to do, and we love being a part of the National Weather Podcast Month. So Melissa Griffin normally is here with us, but she had a big event over the weekend, and she also is called the Crud or something like that. Must be going around in South Carolina, Chris. I'm surprised you and Evan are still here with us. But
It's the pollen.
Amen. Amen.
You know, I got pollen dressed 4 feet high in my front yard. I don't want to hear it.
Pollen. What's that?
Wow.
we haven't got there yet here.
No.
I'm thinking after the 70-degree temperatures we're going to have on Friday and Saturday, that'll become an issue. But as you know, Melissa's been promoting Kokoros all month. This is March Madness, and we have a little video on how you can register to be a Kokoros member.
Hi there. Here's your chance to finally do something about the weather. The South Carolina Climate Office wants you to participate in a program called the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail,
All right, well, as last check, I can say I haven't checked today, but as of yesterday, South Carolina was leading the nation with newest Kokoros members. So good for you, South Carolina. Keep on working. I think if you do this, this will be 2 years in a row that South Carolina has taken home the Kokoros Cup. So North Carolina, you need to get on the ball there, get signed up. So we appreciate you joining us tonight here for the Carolina Weather Group. As I teased just a little bit earlier, next week we have Doug Hildebrand. He is the ambassador or leader of the Weather Ready Nation campaign, and he's going to be joining us talking about hazard simplification as well as some upcoming spring and summer hazards that we need to take into account, like rip currents and lightning safety and tornado safety. So always have fun to have Doug joining us. So he will be our guest next week on the Carolina Weather Group. As we leave you tonight, our own Chris Jackson shot some amazing sunset footage over the Columbia Airport. So we hope you enjoy that, and we will see you back here next Wednesday night for another episode of the Carolina Weather Group.